Well, welcome everybody to the National Landcare Network. I think this is one of the first webinars we've done at the National Landcare Network level. My name is Kristen. I am the Partnerships Manager for the National Landcare Network, and I am your webinar host today. And I just want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. So just to make everybody aware of that. And so we hope to we will be sharing the webinar for those that aren't able to make it today. So this webinar is being held at in a time slot that would normally be our monthly National Landcare Network Members Council meeting. The chair of Members Council, the wonderful Beth Ripper, is not able to be here for the beginning of this webinar. We're hoping she will be able to join us shortly, but Beth does offer her apologies, but also her welcomes. And in the tradition of Members Council and meetings with the National Landcare Network, I would like to offer an acknowledgement of country on Beth's behalf. So I would like to begin by acknowledging this beautiful and ancient country upon which we work, live, play and do land care. I pay my deep respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge First Nations people that are joining us today. I'm joining you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, part of the Great Kulin Nation. It always was, always will be Aboriginal land. These lands were never ceded. You might like to take a moment to acknowledge country wherever you are joining us from today. We come together today to talk about grassroots landcare and advocating for landcare across this wonderful country. And I really think when I reflect on landcare and what landcare is about, part of what I come to is that we're seeking to share and to learn and to become better custodians of the land and of water and of the places that we live. We have a lot to learn walking together, and I just want to pay deep respects to the tens of thousands of years of First Nations wisdom and knowledge, practice, and acknowledging that long tradition of caring for country and how much we can learn. Just going to make sure my slides are working. This is the statement from the National Landcare Network, so I'll just pop that up there too. So welcome everybody. We know that we've got people joining us from across the country. We've got representatives of groups, landcare networks and landcare peak bodies. So thank you for joining us. And I'd like to acknowledge that we've got people joining us from supporting organisations as well. So thank you for joining us today. We do have some slides to share, which you've seen there too. So we've switched off the video and audio function to hopefully improve your team's experience. We know that Teams can be a bit problematic sometimes for people, so we're trying to make sure we've got maximum bandwidth. I'm just going to run through quickly what the rest of this webinar looks like, but I'd like to highlight a couple of things, which is that we've got a Q&A function which you'll find at the top of your screen, hopefully. So please do feel free, if you have questions, to ask those questions in that Q&A area. Jess Dixon will be moderating, our wonderful executive officer will be moderating those questions. Hi, Jess. And Jess was very keen for us to also acknowledge, and I'm with you there, Jess, that today is International Women's Day, and we'd just like to acknowledge all the women and girls out there and leaders in all spaces, and just wish everybody a really wonderful International Women's Day. You'll see the Landcare Facebook channels sharing lots of amazing stories and profiles of the wonderful women in Landcare. So make sure you check out some of the social media coming through today. So yeah, please do make the use of that Q&A. Shortly, I'll introduce Jim Adams, our Chief Executive Officer for the National Landcare Network, who will take us on a bit of the funding submission and the advocacy journey that the National Landcare Network has been on recently, and explain a bit more about why the timing right now is so critical for us to be getting our messages through at the federal level around future funding for community landcare. And then we're going to look a bit more deeply at the proposals that we've put up, and I'll just cover off on some of those, and we'll talk advocacy and how we can all get involved in advocating for the future funding of this amazing network. Then we've got time. So we've got time to actually have a bit of a conversation and answer some questions that you might have about the advocacy journey, about the National Landcare Network, or what it is you can do to take these messages to the federal MPs in your regions and really, I guess, kick those messages home. So I think now it's great to see people still joining. So just to remind you, the Q&A function at the top there, Jess is there. And I'd just like to also acknowledge that we have Kerry Olsen with the National Landcare Network team, and Kerry was instrumental with others on actually pulling together. It was quite, there's quite a considerable work goes on in the background, pulling together things like budget submissions. And I'd just really like to acknowledge the work of the budget submission team. It was a collaborative effort, and the materials drawn from Members Council and the peak bodies as well. So it was definitely a team effort. But with no further ado, I will hand over to you, Jim, to give us a bit of a journey on the advocacy so far.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Kristen, and thanks very much for that those introductory comments and remarks and that welcome acknowledgement of country. Thank you. I'd also like to start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from the Bidwell lands of the Yuin Nation down in Far East Gippsland in Victoria, and I'd like to pay my respects also to First Nations persons, their elders past, present and emerging across these lands and waters in which we are so privileged to live. Hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have such a significant level of interest from people to come and attend this webinar. And as Kristen has noted, we do have quite a few guests from other organisations. We really appreciate and welcome your interest in today's webinar, and hope that you find it to be of interest, inform and of value to you. And we certainly welcome ongoing engagement after today's webinar. So as Kristen mentioned, we just wanted to do a short introduction to the advocacy journey we've been on, I suppose, probably commencing prior to the last election, and how it's evolved from that time forward until where we are now. Starting with the role of the National Network, the National Landcare Network as a peak body. And in that role, the National Landcare Network has a very important function in advocacy on behalf of its members in the form of the state and territory peak bodies, and in turn in their members as the grassroots land carers and groups out there. So advocacy is core business for peak bodies. Peak bodies exist essentially to be accountable to and transparent to, and to consult with their members to gain their mandate to make representations on their behalf and advocate those representations to other stakeholders, including government. And it's in our case to try and ensure ongoing support recognition, but also acknowledgement of the work that our members do, and of course hoping that with that acknowledgement and recognition comes ongoing support and in fact indeed increased support. To do this, the National Landcare Network works across a number of levels through a number of mechanisms with a wide range of stakeholders and partners. Examples of the sorts of things that we do in advocacy include development of memorandums of understanding with different organisations, other partners, other stakeholders, statements of common purpose, collaboration agreements, but also submissions to government in various important processes. We've recently put submissions to the Productivity Commission in respect of the Future Drought Fund. We also put in a submission recently on behalf of our members in respect of the environmental markets legislation that the government is putting through and the safeguard mechanism. We also work with organisations such as the NRM Regions Australia, National Resource Management. I've been put on notice by my wonderful staff today not to use acronyms, so if I do, apologise. Natural Resource Management Regions Australia, where we've recently developed a framework for collaboration at the regional level to try and encourage more effective and efficient outcomes and support for Landcare and collaboration between Landcare and regional bodies or regional organisations through that mechanism. And of course, we've also put in submissions to government for improved funding and engagement of Landcare, for the work of Landcare, and in particular, the submission that we're here to talk about today. So just going through our journey, just quickly on that slide that's on there at the moment, a very quick sort of note that the on-ground reach of the membership of the National Landcare Network. So as you can see, we've got the 8 state and territory Landcare peak bodies across the bottom. They collectively have about 2,000 active members, representing about 6,000 groups and about 160,000 individual land carers across the country. So it's a very significant actual membership. Those are actually registered members of each of those organisations. So we're very proud of that. As we know, in May 2022, we saw a change of government and political leadership. In October 22, the new government released an interim budget, which included the delivery of a number of election commitments that the NLN had advocated for ahead of the election, including a National Landcare facilitator and the Landcare Rangers program. As well, in that October interim budget, the government announced a number of measures of its own that it's seeking to implement around environmental planning, threatened species management, the 3030 announcement, most of which would commence in July 2023. And therefore, while those interim measures were sort of budgeted for in that period, they will again be picked up in more detail in the May budget that's coming out obviously a little later this year. This all coincides, of course, as well with the end of the National Landcare program and the design of the next program for the funds, the National Heritage Trust funding. So it's really important that in this point in time that Landcare is actually talking to government about what that next program looks like, how it's going to support the movement, and how seeking to contribute or put sort of suggestions through to government on what that could look like. And for that purpose, the National Landcare Network has been working with its members, as I say, from before the election. In the first instance, we produced the Community Landcare Futures Framework, which Christian will take us through in a little bit of detail in a minute. And then in December last year, we produced the budget submission that we submitted to the two relevant submission governments. And those things are really about putting forward, both of those are current, both of them are on the table, both of them are live in our discussions and advocacy with the government. And they're really about putting forward proposals that are drawn from the grassroots through our membership about what they think the proposals that we could put to government might be that could make a difference and increase the level of support and engagement and the opportunity for Landcare to actually contribute to supporting government to do the things it wants to do around threatened species, taking real action on the environment and on climate change. So that's the journey that we've been on. It comes to us at a time when we have seen, in fact, a real decline in funding of Landcare over time. Between Landcare, National Landcare Program 1 and 2, although the funding was retained at the same level, the period of the program was extended by a year, so that is effectively a 20% reduction in funding. Similarly, between the current phase of the National Landcare Program and whatever follows, the next round of the National Heritage Trust funding, we've seen a number of the programs that were included in the October budget scheduled to be 6-year programs. So although the funding level remains the same for the overall program, many of the programs are now extending out for 6 years, an extra year. So in the context of all of that, as I say, we've been trying to advocate to government a range of opportunities that we think could make a very significant contribution to assisting government to achieve its objectives. All of this is very dynamic, of course, because you work in a submission with your members, you put it out there, and then you discover that, in fact, there's a whole lot of other stakeholders that the government are talking to, of course. The government's got its own ideas about where it wants to go with certain processes and mechanisms, and you get feedback also through that process, and you have to evolve and be flexible and prepared to think laterally about how you can still achieve the objectives for your members through this advocacy process. And of course, we're advocating in this case into a government process, if you like. This is not like the kind of advocacy that we're probably more used to doing, which is in an election context, where you're advocating to different parties and trying to get commitments from one or the other that you can then use to try and get support for your movement going forward. In this case, we are advocating, and we're also advocating for ongoing support in a construct where the government are severely fiscally restrained, and so it's a very challenging environment to be advocating for funding. But our submission really did want to make the point to government that, look, if you are serious about real action on climate change, real action on the environment, then in fact there does need to be real investment in restoration and repair, and the sorts of things that Landcare is so good at doing. So I might finish up there, Kristen, and hand over back to you to take us in a bit more detail through the some of the actual proposals we put forward.
Thanks so much, Jim. It's so great. I've learnt so much working alongside Jim in this space. It's been a learning curve for me. So I guess we're taking you on the learning curve today. We've just checked in to see who's been joining the conversation. Welcome to those that have just joined, and I'd just like to acknowledge the chair of the National Landcare Network has joined us. Welcome, Louise. And we have some chairs of boards at the state peak body level as well, and I'd like to just acknowledge you as well. Thanks everybody for joining us. So I'm going to just hopefully flick through the slides. So thanks, Jim, for that overview. It is an ongoing journey, and one where we do reflect and adapt and respond to feedback from at the federal level and through government processes, but also through communications with the grassroots, through the Members' Council, and ongoing co-design with our state and territory Landcare organisations. It's absolutely humbling to work for this network. One of the proposals that we co-designed, we launched last year in March prior to the election, And it really looked at proposing what could we do as a community-based movement? What was our future, and what support do we need? We looked at this in the light of 3 priority initiatives, and it was really looking around complementing the existing Regional Land Partnership Program, which you're all probably well aware. How can we work from the community? It's like this combination of community-based, how can we empower the grassroots to meet these other initiatives that are coming from the federal level, the state level and the regional level? Where's the meeting ground in between, and how can we really empower the grassroots as part of this process? There were 3 priority initiatives, and the full document's still available on our website. We will share links so you can go and chase these up. The first one is probably the one that we've picked up on with the budget submission, and that's the Community Investment Initiative. So really the key messages are that that community investment, having programs which direct funds to community groups at the grassroots level, is really important. And we've explored and described a couple of different mechanisms by which this might occur, but the real main message is grassroots land care needs investment. You saw that quote earlier from Dr. Ian Cresswell, who remarked when they released the State of Environment, the decrease in funding for the grassroots over the past 10 years. Yet it's the very actions of the grassroots that make the difference. And Tanya Plibersek herself has acknowledged this at her address at the National Landcare Conference. So the work that we do is recognised. We know it's important. How do we make sure it's invested into the future through direct funding? So that's programs that we can access from the grassroots directly. The Leadership Initiative, it's still possibly relevant in terms of a broader application in the thinking around the Landcare Rangers program, but this is very much about leadership and building capacity, and that particular priority initiative was around making available a budget for leadership for landcare leaders on the ground, for First Nations landcare leadership, but also looking at the opportunity that's presented with environmental markets. Now we're talking nature repair market, and I guess making some funding available for us to skill up in this area and really understand what these opportunities present for us. We also proposed as part of these priorities, I think it was, the idea of a landcare facilitator to bring all of these themes together and to really talk about leading a larger community of practice where we look at landcare and the innovations in landcare and bringing those to the national consciousness. So there were some elements in this Landcare Futures framework that have been taken forward. So more recently, as Jim mentioned, there was a team that have pulled together a budget submission leading into this year's May budget. So the work's been going on late last year, and as you know, and this is all evolving. So the conversation is an ongoing evolution. You'll see there are parts of the budget submission that have drawn on the Futures framework. I guess it's saying we see lots of opportunities and we're really prepared to sit down with stakeholders in the government, sit down with our members and listen to them and co-design ways where we can make a difference, but also see the investment that the movement needs. So these are this is the table of contents for the budget submission. We won't go into detail on all of them. We would like to highlight today those elements of the budget submission, I guess, that we call are live. So we've had feedback that there's interest in some of the elements of the recommendations. These are also the recommendations where the rubber hits the road for the grassroots. So particularly this building on the Landcare legacy with direct on-ground funding. Again, this document is available. So we will put links in the chat and in a follow-up, so you can follow through on all of these documents if you wish to take a deeper dive. We're really just touching on our advocacy and the proposals that have been put forward in a bit of an overview way for you today. So this is a really big piece of the budget submission, and this is saying to government, you know, we would like to see 50 million a year or 250 million total over 5 years for direct funding for grassroots landcare. And I think it's fair to say that this is the acknowledged gap in the funding landscape for landcare right now, this direct funding to the grassroots. And this is what really unlocks the capacity at the ground level. How do we invest in, we've had 40 years of landcare. How do we advocate for the kind of funding that's needed to ensure that grassroots landcare groups can continue to evolve, grow and do the work on ground that's needed? I think it's fair that we all acknowledge that there's no shortage of work to do. But it's also time to think about how do we really invest in our networks and our people and provide them with the security, the ongoing funding security needed to ensure projects can roll out through time. I think most of us involved in landcare have been asking for long-term or longer-term funding for a long time, and recognise the step change that occurs when you get that security of funding. You're able to employ facilitators, for example, or undertake our projects operate over ecological timescales. How do we ensure we get the funding needed to make the difference we seek to make on ground? So again, as Jim was saying, the details of and the programs themselves are open to evolution and feedback. And I guess that's one of the reasons we're doing the webinar today, is not just to shine a light on the processes of the National Landcare Network and invite you in to what is our advocacy journey, but also to say if you've got ideas about how these programs could be developed, the National Landcare Network's always interested to hear from you. So the other funding commitment here, this is a sort of what we call the keep the lights on funding. So the continued funding of the peak bodies to do their peak body work, representing the grassroots at the federal level. It's a unique network of peak bodies across Australia, very diverse, and the work that's being done is important. So it's a bit of a no-brainer, that one. It's really about continuing to fund the Landcare Network for their peak body advocacy roles. The National Landcare Facilitator, as Jim mentioned, is something that has piqued the interest and is an ongoing conversation, I guess you could say. And there has been National Landcare Facilitators in the past, and they've been very effective. So this is really around a high-profile leadership role at the national level to keep, I guess, shining the light on landcare and what landcare does, but making sure we've also got a seat at important tables, and that the Landcare Facilitator could really fly the flag. There's a lot of important conversations happening around international agreements and how they might translate at the national level. But of course, everything at the end of the day also translates to action by the grassroots on the ground. So this is definitely an ongoing conversation. And if you've got questions, just to reiterate around any elements, I'm not the expert in these proposals. I'm just sort of touching on it from a presentation level, but we do have experts, subject matter experts in Jim and Kerry and others in the group. So please do pop any questions you've got around these elements in the chat. So look, I think there's a really interesting opportunity to bring this idea and to bring a person, you know, an identity to this role of a National Landcare Facilitator. The other element of the proposal we'd really like to bring to the conversation is the Landcare Ranger program, which Jim mentioned. So there have been commitments by the federal government to both the National Landcare Facilitator role and the Landcare Ranger program. So what might these look like, and how might they, best work with grassroots Landcare? The Landcare Ranger program was initially, I think, sort of envisioned as a employment program on the back of COVID, and it's changing now. Employment's not such a big issue. So this is, it seems to be moving more into a training opportunity, and how could we best as networks and grassroots land carers, what would an effective Landcare Ranger or Landcare traineeship, or, I think there's some room for some conversation here, and it's something that we're very aware of and working on at the moment. So I guess what I'd like to say, it's probably important to say, is that the numbers that you see here and the detail in this proposal, all of this is live and evolving, but the concept of a Rangers program is very real. So really, and I'll just keep an eye on the time because I really would like to make sure we come over to you and have a conversation and answer some questions. The key messages behind all of these proposals is that the National Landcare Network is seeking renewed direct funding for local groups to work in local communities. And there's a really, I guess, a cut-through message or a theme that runs through all of the proposals that we've put out since early last year, which is that it's really important that government find effective ways to engage with grassroots Landcare in the co-design of NRM programs, whether that be the National Landcare Facilitator or Landcare Rangers, for example. And so we're obviously through the state peak Landcare organisations and through the National Landcare Network, there's a real opportunity for government to work with the network across Australia to do that. And the other key message is that we need operational funding for the Landcare peak bodies to continue doing their good work. So they're the kind of high-level three key messages that flow through all of the proposals. And ultimately, when it comes to the key message, is that we are seeking a renewed commitment from the federal government for funding for grassroots Landcare. So this is where we're calling out to you, the grassroots community, to our groups, to our networks, to our peak state and territory Landcare organisations, and to our supporters, that now I think Jim highlighted the importance of timing and where we are in the landscape. It's competitive. The government, has a challenge ahead, but we are important, and Landcare is necessary and needed. So how can we advocate for a renewed direct funding for grassroots Landcare? This is the work that we do, and the National Landcare Network and your peak state and territory bodies do. But it's, I guess, more powerful, or it can really help to cut through if the grassroots is reaching out. And it's those, all of us in our own regions have relationships with our elected representatives, and it's those relationships. I don't know about you, but our National Tree Days and our tree planting days, I think our MPs love nothing more but to get their hands dirty, and they have supported us over often long periods of time. So it's a really good time to check in with them now and just let them know that we are seeking a renewed commitment for the Landcare movement across Australia, and we would really love their support. So I guess we're saying, if you've got the advocate in you and you've got these existing relationships, now is a great time to drop them an email or a phone call. If you're a group and you've got some great relationships with your local media, it's also a great time to reach out and let them know that now's a good time to I guess, let them know that there's an alarm bells are ringing. I think that statement from Ian Cresswell is really important. It's not just the Landcare movement that recognises a decline in funding, but and the opportunity for the Landcare movement to make a difference in the state of environment. So we've got some material that you can use to draw upon, there's the link there to the blog, and we'll share that as well. There are some key messages in that material that you can draw on to help if you're keen on taking this message home to your region. So I think the last thing from me is just ways that you can join the conversation. If you don't already, please do follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And I would say that the same, it's an amazing network. Instagram's fantastic for connecting with Landcare at all scales. Follow the peak bodies, the state and territory Landcare peak bodies, particularly those in your state. There's some great stories. We can all amplify the Landcare message every day. But we will be sharing advocacy messages specifically, so you can share those. And we've got some key dates there where we will be sharing messages. I guess the point being, it's really the messages over March and April that we think will influence the May budget. So now is the time to shine the light on the work that we all do. And there's some tags, suggested tags and hashtags there as well that you may use. So this is all optional. It's an invitation. We're shining a light on the work that we're already doing at the peak body level. We wanted to offer the opportunity for a bit of open the lid on the box, have a look inside the work of the National Landcare Network and the peak state and territory Landcare organisations, and offer that invitation for the grassroots to also get involved. So that's pretty much it from me. I'm going to stop presenting, and Jess, I might throw over to you around the Q&A.
Wonderful.
I hope I haven't
Kristen.
stunned everybody into silence.
Thank you. So at the moment, I think we're, as we like to pivot at the National Landcare Network, there might be some technical problems with some people being able to see the Q&A section. I can see a few posts coming through, but I will also, if you don't have access to the Q&A section, I will open the chat function for you to put any of your questions through the chat function if you're having any troubles with the Q&A. So I would like to, and I guess as well, you know, we'd also love to hear from you personally. So if you do have a question that you would like to ask us directly, please, you can raise your hand at the top of the screen and we can throw to you as well.
Thanks, Jess, and you might feel free to turn on the mics and videos for people now. I don't have any more slides, so I don't think I'll break Teams from this point forward. My maid, the Teams apprehension. So I can see there's a few comments in the chat. Hi, Em from Larrakia Lands, and I can see that John has asked a question here or provided a comment. The presentation is intended to help us get behind the budget submission to government, attracting funds. So one of the most effective arguments to unlock government funding is to demonstrate highly effective partnerships. In other words, attracting funds from outside government. How is the NLN moving forward in this area? That's a great question. Thanks for that, John. I think, I'm not sure, Jim or Kerry, I think that's one for the budget submission proposal is a project. I'll just mention that the budget submission project was running alongside another project, an initiative of the National Landcare Network, which is more looking at a National Landcare Network prospectus and capacity statement. So, which very much touches on those points that you raised there, John. And that is almost ready for launch. So absolutely, I think it's not clear in the budget submission itself, but it's perhaps made clearer by a complementary project. But I don't know, Jim, did you want to respond to that at all?
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, look, thanks for that question, John. And really, I was going to point to the same piece of work that that Kristen is pointing to. Certainly, the National Landcare Network has not sought that actively in the past to engage with sponsors and philanthropic funders, but definitely in the last 12 months, we've seen it as a space in which we need to go and promote the capacity and the ability of our network, which is the network that can connect philanthropic funders and sponsors to the grassroots and attract funding directly from those organisations through our own capacity. And for that purpose, we have been putting together the prospectus that Kristen refers to, and we'll be advocating or promoting that prospectus actively with philanthropics and potential sponsors as soon as it's completed. And indeed, we've already started that process. We've also shared the prospectus with the government, so that we are in fact saying to the government, and they certainly received a very positive response when we shared it with government, that that in fact the National Landcare Network is now looking to go out and to do that. So your point is well made and reflected in the way in which the prospectus was received, even in draft form, when it was shared with government.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, John. And I can see, I think we've got the chat is working again, so that's great. And Emily, just now, how can Community Landcare provide input into the evolution or co-design with the Australian Government of the Landcare Ranges program? Thanks, Emily, for that question. Jim, did you want to respond to that one as well?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Emily, for that question. It has been interesting to watch the evolution of this program as it sort of morphed from an employment program that had sort of 71 odd groups associated with it during COVID when we sort of first conceived of this. And of course, at that stage, it was being put to the current government and discussed with the current government, but also there were some members of that that group that were speaking with the opposition and the now government, and certainly in the election there was an expression of interest to have an election commitment around that program, but it certainly has morphed or is tending now towards a program that's less focused on employment and more focused on the opportunity. It always included a training component, even as part of the election commitment, but the focus is perhaps shifting from the employment side towards the training side, but still based on employing people and then being able to train them. The government have, in our discussions with them, have had a view that there's a little bit more time around the opportunity to design and co-design this program with stakeholders. And the NLN were very lucky recently when we held a collective meeting of our board, members council and the CEOs of all of the state and territory landcare organisations in Canberra to have some departmental people come and speak to us and in fact put a specific request or invitation to us to provide them with feedback on how we think the Landcare Ranges program might best operate. And we had some ideas or some thoughts there, as you saw in the funding submission, but they were really saying, well, look, depending on what this thing looks like, we could do this or we could do that. We now have the opportunity to have some direct input into what it looks like. And so the answer to your question is, if you have any thoughts, we are actually right at this moment putting together a submission to go to government on what we think the opportunities for the co-design in the Landcare Ranges program look like, and we would very much welcome your input into that process.
Thanks so much, Jim, and thanks, Emily. I think it's topical and timely, as we've mentioned. So Todd had made a comment in the chat too relating to the Landcare Ranges program and would like to see a focus on employment and training, which is needed in rural and remote communities. I think we agree with you, Todd. I'll pop the contact email for the National Landcare Network in the chat as well, and we will be capturing the chat too. So please, if you do have input, you can, like Todd has there, pop it into the chat. A comment also from Todd is that the facilitator budget, the $500,000 a year for the national facilitator, seems quite high. I think that, did you want to touch on that, Jim, quickly?
Yeah,
and then
sure.
I'll move on to there's some further chat. There's another one actually also, I might just pick up on this because it's national facilitator related as well. So there's one around the 500,000 per annum. That seems a bit high. The other one is from Don. Hi, Don. How has the government received the proposal that the facilitator be located with the NLN, as all the previous facilitators have been located with government or operated as an independent consultant?
Yep. So I'll go to both of those. Thanks, Kristen. So, and
Thanks,
thanks,
Jim.
Todd, and thanks, Don. If I can sort of construct the National Landcare Facilitator more as a concept than a person or a position, if you like, we actually see the National Landcare Facilitator potentially being, and again, these are ongoing discussions that we've been having with the government since the position was slated, if you like, or budgeted for in the October budget. And so these are our concepts. I'm not saying these have been accepted by government yet. So obviously, ultimately, government will make the decision of what it looks like and where and how it's located. But certainly, the concept is to have perhaps a high-profile person, a bit like the National Soils Advocate, as a high-level sort of advocate for Landcare, but then to have support for that person, and for that support to have the role not only of supporting the advocate, but also of engaging within all of the Landcare structures that exist around the country. So the state and territory peak bodies, Landcare Australia, other Landcare national organisations, and some of the key stakeholders. So it's seen as being, that role will the high level advocate role will obviously need to be remunerated, and for a person of that level, there's a level of funding required, but also for the support for that advocate to do the national and state level and advocacy. There needs to be a reasonably significant budget as well. So that's where we came up with that that figure. It's not just one position. And then how is the suggestion that it be within the NLN being received? Look, we haven't. There's been no direct comment about that. We are aware that past positions have been located within government or as independent consultants. We think that that has perhaps led to those positions not being maybe as they became more sort of advocates of government policy, if you like, than necessarily the kind of role that we're looking for, where there'll be a much stronger two-way communication. And we feel that having that person located where that direct communication with the grassroots is facilitated more effectively and efficiently is the way to go. But obviously, ultimately, government will make the decision on that, and we are in discussion with government about that at the moment. There's a strong possibility that that position may well be filled by some kind of tender or grant process as well. So it's an ongoing discussion. But I think the high level or irrespective of those things, the opportunity to again get a position of that nature funded and supported and working on behalf of the broad Landcare movement is really exciting, and the fact that it's actually been funded and we now need to work out how to do it is a great place to be.
Thanks so much, Don, Todd, for your questions, and Jim for that response. There's a question in the chat from Bruce. Hi, Bruce, from Noongar country in Perth, beautiful Perth, Western Australia. It's around the Rangers program and how broad the funding opportunity might be, and asks, could the funding be used to support, for example, Aboriginal people through university to PhD level? So yeah, I guess it's really around the framing for the Landcare Ranger program and what does that opportunity currently look like?
Yeah, I'll jump into that one as well. So just when this was first conceived of, Bruce, I think there was talk of 1,000 positions, Ranger positions over the 4-year period, $71 or $75 million. You don't need to do the maths, or if you do the maths, that's not a lot of funding per position, and that many positions over 4 years isn't a long tenure, if you like, for each position. Each position can only really be in existence for a relatively short period of time. So even at that stage, the early feedback that we were providing to the government was, can we perhaps have fewer positions over a longer time? And can we perhaps have the opportunity for the training component to be more than just Cert 3, which is what was in the original proposal, and can the training opportunities actually be tailored to the calibre of applicants, so that if you get applicants that are best suited to go through to Cert 3 and over a particular time frame, can we do that? But could we also, in the case where an applicant shows particular acumen and capacity, take them on a longer journey through to a higher level of training, and that's very much still part of the ongoing discussion. And we know that the government are talking to some of the state and territory agencies where they do have Landcare facilitator type arrangements in place, about how those arrangements work within those states and territories. So it's certainly an ongoing discussion. And if I can take that question as a suggestion or feedback that we might include in our submission to government about this, then we certainly will do so and are doing so. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Jim. So we still have, if anyone would like to pose questions or comments, we've still got a few minutes left of the webinar. I have popped a link in the chat to our blog, which contains the original media release, as well as a one-page summary that you might like to print out and take with you and maybe leave on the desk of somebody important at the federal level in your region. It has that wonderful map as well, and there's also a really simple advocacy resource pack there for any of you that feel inspired and motivated to take up the advocacy in your own region. This is optional, but it is, we really do feel like the time is now to really get that grassroots message out there for future funding of Landcare. That's the key message. We would like to see renewed direct funding, a renewed commitment for the grassroots movement. There is a Landcare Tasmania question that has come in. If we are asked by or targeted by the politicians, what we want the 250 million for, and how would it benefit our state? Is there a best statement to say?
Thanks, Kristen, and thanks, Tassie. Look, I think part of the reason why we chose the $250 million number is to really try and emphasise to government that there does need to be investment in the restoration and repair side of the environmental equation, and the it's one thing to be announcing to improving regulation, and that's really urgently needed, but it can only affect what happens the day after it becomes law. If you really want to do something about the restoration work and the repair work that needs to happen to actually generate meaningful action on climate change and the environment, you actually have to invest money in that. And it's not, a couple of tens of millions here and there. It's a significant amount of money. And so that's why we came up with that quite significant number. We have been told by the department that it doesn't lack in ambition, but we didn't intend it to. We wanted it to actually register that we thought it was a significant amount of money. How would it benefit our state and territory? Well, obviously what we would hope, and this would come down to program design, but one would hope obviously that if there was funding of that level available, and it was evolved through some mechanism that grassroots landcare had significant input into, whether it be through the NLN or the National Landcare Facilitator or some other mechanism, that obviously it would go out on merit in the first instance. It would go out also based on alignment with national regional body regional plans, and Landcare having had significant input into those regional plans, and one would anticipate that would then obviously, there would be projects of merit across all states and territories, I don't think there'd be an appetite to go, oh well, that's 40 million each or something. I think it really does have to be on merit, but I think it's then up to states and territories to demonstrate merit of programs, and I'm sure there's no shortage of meritorious programs in Tassie or indeed any state or territory.
Thanks, Jim. I'm just conscious we've got 2 minutes left of our scheduled time together, and I think it was really important to underline that ambitious line and line in the sand. It's not short-term work we're all seeking to achieve here, so let's actually be ambitious in our thinking. There's a couple of questions. Maxine, hi Maxine, it's International Women's Day. Could we please think specifically of Heather Mitchell and Joan Kerner? Thanks for that, Maxine. And they're recognising we've got supporters in the audience and in the room. Our chair, Louise, hi Louise, Duxbury, mentions it's great to see our friends from Landcare Australia on this discussion. How could Landcare Australia assist the National Landcare Network in this advocacy for grassroots Landcare group support through these new initiatives? Now, I've posed that question with 1 minute to go. I think it also follows on from another comment from John Brisbane around how do we work more closely with non-government funding opportunities. We just did a lot of work on the nature repair market, so that's a very fertile area for further conversation. And there's a comment there from Sarah Barrett saying, really appreciate the NLN direction and advocacy to set an ambitious vision for Landcare. So they are some closing questions. Louise, thank you for yours. And I'm not sure if we want to put our LAL colleagues on the spot or if anybody from Landcare Australia would like to respond. but it's certainly a conversation we will be continuing to take forward. How do we all advocate for grassroots land care moving forward?
I might just jump in very quickly, Kristen, and bearing in mind that we've only got a very short time. And yeah, just to sort of repeat what you just said then, we are very keen to sit down with Landcare Australia and talk through how we can jointly advocate for the grassroots movement going forward. And there are a whole bunch of opportunities and initiatives that we can take up in that space. So it's an opportunity. I think both organisations have significant capacity to advocate, and it would be great to see it coming together for this purpose.
Thanks so much, Jim, and thanks everybody for joining us. I mean, who knew so many people would be interested in budget advocacy? But of course, what we're here for is grassroots landcare and the future of the community landcare movement. So I do fully know well why so many people showed up to this webinar. Thanks for those comments. This webinar was recorded, so we will be making it available through our website as well, so that people can be a bit more familiar with the advocacy work of the National Landcare Network, but also to get involved. I've popped a link into the chat. The contact email is there as well. And thank you to the members councillors for giving over your monthly regular members council workshop. We will reconnect soon, but please do reach out with any questions, and someone from the team will definitely be in touch. We definitely want to hear from you around the proposals put forward always, but specifically the timing is hot right now. So ideas around land care ranges and other elements that we ran through today, very, very welcome from the National Landcare Network. Thanks, Jim, for your guidance and expertise as always. It's humbling and I always learn a lot. So thank you very much for all that you give. And thanks, everybody. We're going to close off the webinar now, but don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or follow-up. Great to see everybody. Go forth, grassroots land care.